Now, I wanted, first of all, to thank everybody who has donated to my recent fundraiser. Now, I very, very rarely feel the need to do any fundraising at all because I have so many um, dedicated viewers who do donate regularly in small amounts, and that normally keeps things going perfectly well. As I mentioned in yesterday's program, there have been some unexpected convergence of all kinds of different expenses all at the one time, which is unusual. It happens to me maybe every 10 years or so. So I want to thank everyone who has donated, those who continue to donate, and in particular those who donated relatively large sums of money. It really surprised me by the generosity that I've seen from people who watch this program. So thank you all very much. And if you'd like to continue donating at a lower level, that's fantastic. But basically, you've exceeded my wildest expectations. So thanks once again. In the news today, well, it's a lot of the same old, as you might expect. And one of the things I noticed in the news this morning is that a think tank, and this is just basically code words for a Tufton Street bunch of people then in London who are looking at how the rich could be made richer and how things could be made better for those who are already fairly comfortable, came out with a description of Britain, in inverted commas, although Scotland and Wales are never mentioned, as a divided society. And they claim it's a deeply divided society, not just divided, but divided apparently, according to their analysis, into 7 so-called tribes. Now this interested me because we're often accused here in Scotland of being very tribal in our outlook. Groups of people in different parts of Scotland have some sort of tribal or competitive attitude to those in other parts of the country. But this is not quite the same thing. This description of tribalism in England, because it clearly does not include Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland in its assessment, categorises people into groups: those who are sort of ultra patriots, those who have a fixed idea of what England should be and will not budge from it. And then you've got sort of progressive people, you've got socialists, and you've got the far right, you've got the ultras of the likes of Reform, and lots of little subgroups in between. Now this is interesting because I think what it shows us is that even in the depths of Westminster and in London, there is a worry amongst the ruling classes that things are getting a bit hard to manage. Now when you have 7 different tribes, if you like, groups of people all thinking and acting differently in the one country, it makes it extremely difficult for any government of any complexion at all to come up with policies which will please the majority of them, because you're always going to piss somebody off, no matter what you do. Now, we know for a fact, because we've seen this happening repeatedly, that both the Tory party in the past and now Sir Keir Starmer's party, I'm not going to call it Labour, it's the Starmer party, have heavily trailed the idea of stopping the boats, as they say. Now, these are boatloads of refugees, people fleeing war and persecution in other places, trying to get across the English Channel in rubber dinghies. And they focus so much of attention on that that nothing else seems to matter. Now, this is obviously to please a certain segment of the English population who view this influx of migrants as a threat. Now, I don't live in the south coast of England, and I don't experience that feeling of seeing lots of migrants coming in to my area. But on the other hand, there are other ways of helping to prevent this from happening. For one thing, stopping the wars that people are fleeing from, making the places that they come from safe for them to return to. Instead of which, we're really just trying to lock them out or force them back to the shores of France. So that kind of thing is one part of this tribal kind of breakdown that's been going on in England. And then there are sort of progressive people who would rather see more bigger government from what used to be the Labour Party, is now the Starmer Party, coming back and providing a bigger safety net. But instead of that, they're seeing benefits being cut. And tax concessions being given to the wealthy, very much along the lines of the Tory party. So the Starmer party is very much not the Labour Party. So there is no party of the left in England anymore, and so anybody with any kind of socialist leanings, soft or hard, is left with nobody really to vote for. And if they had voted for Starmer's Labour Party, they are going to be severely disappointed by the resulting government which has been formed. Now, as well as having seen this think tank making this pronouncement about the sorry state of English society, because remember, it's not Scotland, and it certainly isn't Wales or Northern Ireland they're talking about either. This is a divided England. The Daily Mail, or as I like to call it, the Hate Mail, which is probably the farthest right-wing newspaper that has pushed itself into Scotland, because the Daily Mail in Scotland is nothing more than an organ of the far right in Scotland, which really doesn't serve any purpose in Scotland. It doesn't have the support levels of the other daily papers. But anyway, they decided to make a Freedom of Information request to find out something nasty about Scotland that they could turn into a headline. And so they focused on a Freedom of Information request about the numbers of bus station assaults that have happened in Scotland over the years. And they're using these statistics as some kind of news story to say that you're not safe waiting for a bus in Scotland. And this is part of a continuing strategy by the English right-wing press to make out that Scotland's a terrible place to live, it's unsafe, you're going to be assaulted, there's too much drunkenness, there's drug taking, we're all layabouts, we're all work shy, and Scotland's a pretty shitty place to live. And that has been going on anyway for at least the last 50 years or so. So there's nothing really new in that. But it seems like the British media has, and the British state, basically has run out of things to hit us with, because they're back to some of the old chestnuts of the past. And the most recent old chestnut I saw recently was another Scottish media claim that Scotland's debt had now run up to £500 million. Now, they claim this is the difference between what the Scottish government spends and what it is given by Westminster. In other words, they're saying that we're spending £5 million more every year than we get in our so-called block grant. However, the reason I mention this is the fact that that's impossible. Why is it impossible? Because under the devolution settlement and the Scotland Act of 1998, Scotland is not allowed to borrow. So it cannot possibly have a debt to anybody. If you're not allowed to borrow money, you cannot run up a debt. And the other thing that's plainly ridiculous about this so-called debt is that, as well as not being allowed to borrow, under the Devolution Act, or the Scotland Act of 1998, Scotland's government is required to balance its books every year. And that means at the end of the financial year, they have to publish their expenditure and their revenue and all the rest of it. And largely speaking, the amount spent should be slightly less, or the equivalent to what is being given to Scotland in its block grant. Now remember that the block grant is approximately 60% of our own taxation. So we're missing 40% of the taxation we should have in order to run the country. And therefore, we are forced, just by circumstances, to cut back on other vital services. It's also been revealed in yet another one of these weird Freedom of Information Acts that Scotland has claimed in the news press recently has the highest number of pothole repairs going on simultaneously in the country this year. That tells you two things. One, it tells you that Scotland has not been receiving enough money to do regular routine maintenance on its infrastructure. That means it's been underfunded deliberately by London for decades. But now the situation has got so bad, and it's so obvious to everybody, including to tourists, to politicians, and to companies who are trying to ship their goods on these crumbling roads, that something needed to be done. And that means there appears to have been a lot, not saying that this is official, but it appears to be the case that the roads departments in our various towns and cities have been given carte blanche to have roads repaired everywhere at the same time without the same kind of regulation they normally would be subjected to. And that's meant, in my case, because I see this every day, roadworks appearing magically in places one day, disappearing the next, appearing somewhere else. And it's happening all at the same time in lots of different locations all at once. And the only reason this is happening is because many of these roads have become undrivable, they're unnavigable safely. The potholes are so bad, the road surfaces are breaking up so badly that they're no longer considered safe for travel. If that's the case, the local authority is compelled by law to make the necessary repairs. Now, I wish to God, rather than just patching the bits that are particularly dangerous, which appears to be what's happening at the moment, there should be a programme across the countries of every town and city which has decaying roads, having all of their roads not just patched up, but actually completely resurfaced from one end to the other. Because one of the things that you know yourself if you ever drive around, particularly in Glasgow, is that there are lovely new bits of tarmac that maybe stretch for about 10 metres, and then you're back onto the broken up, crumbling surfaces that they were trying to repair in the first place. There is no consistency to the road repairs. So it is no surprise to me, at least, that there are more road repairs and pothole damage repairs happening simultaneously in Scotland than any other place in the UK. I take that actually as evidence of the drastic underfunding that has been emanating from London for many, many decades. Most local authorities would not prioritise road surface repairs over, say, social welfare elements of their spending. They can't, because they need to look after the people first. And so roads and infrastructure projects come a long way down the pecking order in the hierarchy of things that are important to local authorities. But unlike other parts of the UK, Scotland has perhaps three major metropolitan cities or large towns. And I would say there are probably others, and you'll disagree with me over this, but I would suggest Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Inverness, and perhaps Dundee would be listed in that classification. But because Scotland's the majority of our population live in the central belt, the road system in Glasgow and Edinburgh in the central belt is the place where the most damage appears to be happening. There are, of course, country roads, which, to be honest with you, get less attention. And anybody who's driven, say, the A82 will know that there are areas of that road which have received no attention. There are roads, for example, to Stirling, some of the back roads to Stirling, which are brilliant in places and falling to bits in other parts. And this is all because there has been no joined-up thinking from any of the Scottish parliamentary parties, who could, if they really wanted to, in Holyrood, decide on a national project to resurface every single major road that needs it. And as soon as they've done that, to get started on the minor roads in our housing estates as well, which are probably as bad or worse in many cases. Now, I have to be honest here, and I also have to give a shout out to my own local authority here in Glasgow and to others around it in places like Lanarkshire, Stirlingshire, Eastern Barton, Mid Dumbarton, West Dumbarton, all of these smaller councils within the orbit of Greater Glasgow, which are making every effort they can to repair the damage to their roads as well. And I can see it every day that there is a lot more happening. And I'm very glad of it. I don't see this as a problem. I see this as finally a solution to some of the most egregious problems of our infrastructure. But I think in closing today's show, I'd like to say that if and when we decide to become independent again and get back the powers that we always have had as a nation, and we get all of our taxation available to do it, then a national programme of complete renewal of our infrastructure, and I don't just mean roads, incidentally, I mean cycle roads. We've made a big inroad, if you like, into that. Particularly during COVID, there was a lot of work done on putting in proper cycle roads. They haven't yet achieved the levels of use that they're their creators envisaged, but they will eventually. But we need more of those. But it needs to go alongside improvements to the existing road systems that they share, so that everybody gets to go where they want in one piece without cyclists being endangered. And I'm in favour of that as well. Having said all of that, why is rail transport so bloody expensive in Scotland? Why is it so expensive to go north from the Central Belt, for example? It really shouldn't be. A nationalised railway network like the one that we have in ScotRail should be cheaper, surely, than the commercial networks in England. But perhaps the problem lies in the way the Scottish Government administrates the railway, because it appears at least that ScotRail is like an arm's length company, which runs the railway network on behalf of the Scottish state, but appears to be running it at a profit. I could be wrong there. Maybe somebody can enlighten me. Does ScotRail have a profit motive? Because there's something driving the rail fares upwards consistently, and far higher, incidentally, than even bus fares or plane fares. But it should be much, much cheaper to travel by electric train, which is supposed to be a far more ecologically better way of getting around than in diesel-powered buses or in jet airplanes, for example. But for some reason that's not happening. It's the reverse. It should not be that way. Oh, incidentally, there was one other report which I just read this morning, which I think I should tack on to the end of this programme. This was a report by Channel 4, who made a documentary on rising sea levels around Britain, as they called it, but essentially it was around England's south coast. And by 2030, they showed vast areas of the southeast of England which are likely to be completely flooded during high tides and storms because of much faster rises in sea level around the shallow waters of southeast England. And of course, much of southeast England, East Anglia, the area around the Thames estuary, for example, some of these townships and settlements down there are actually below sea level at high tide, and they're having to build new shore defences to try to keep the seawater out. But because the sea level is rising faster than they can cope with it, they're going to lose vast tracts of southeast England underwater during periods of high tide and storm surges. It's not only happening there, it's also happening in places like Hull as well, and extending all the way in to the centre of the Midlands. It's making vast inroads into the west, into the east coast of England. Some tens of miles inland this flooding might extend. It's also likely to affect the area around Liverpool, around Manchester, and the northwest of England as well, because there are some very low-lying tidal areas there too which would be affected. Now, interestingly, this documentary from Channel 4 never mentioned Scotland at all. It didn't mention Northern Ireland or Wales. But then again, Scotland itself has a much higher level of landmass well above sea level, much higher above sea level than most of the southeast of England, and perhaps is not going to suffer to the same degree, although there will be some places. Wales I'm not so sure about. Perhaps Wales also is pretty mountainous and has a lot of high terrain. Northern Ireland, maybe a little bit like southwest Scotland and not suffering quite so badly, but it looks like the southeast of England, particularly around London, is the most vulnerable to this. So I thought that was interesting. So they've got a divided tribal nation of England, which is going to see vast areas of the southeast flooded because of sea level rises. And Scotland is being hit with news of bus assaults and a spurious debt that we don't have for £500 million, which we can't possibly have borrowed. So it's the usual story. The British media tries to spin a story in Scotland that we're worse than England, but actually none of it is true. But what is true in England is that they are a very divided nation, and they are going to suffer severe flood problems, something which we don't have to worry about, thankfully. Anyway, that's it from Inde-Car today. I thought these stories were interesting just to look at and to debunk. Anyway, in the meantime, I'd like you to keep the faith and keep watching. I'll be back again with Norrie Hunter on Friday morning at 9:30 with Hodma Jacket in the usual slot. And that will continue now indefinitely and so will more frequent programs like this, thanks to your generosity. So again, once again, thank you to all of the fans of the show for helping keeping this going. Any surplus that is left over from the current crowdfund or the fundraiser will be offset against all the rest of the summer's content that I make. So thank you again. Anyway, that's it for Inde-Car today. Keep the faith, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.